don't know. It's probably not. If you look at it very deeply, these are just different functions of the same entity or the same being, rather than different substances that are there. But let's leave that open for discussion. But here you have, it's very interesting what he says. Dharma body, reward body, transformation, fundamentally three are one. So he is addressing that to some extent. He is saying these are three functions of the same thing, the same substance. But then he goes on and he says, seeing this for yourself right within your own nature is a seed for awakening, gaining Buddha. So he moves it away, and this is very interesting. This is what I call the guts of the six patriarchs' teaching. It's called the direct teaching. I don't like the sudden. It's called direct because it's pointing directly. And here he does it again. He says, seeing this for yourself right within your own nature. In other words, okay, I don't want you to imagine the transformation bodies. I don't want you to imagine the Dharmakaya or the reward body or to visualize these things. He's saying, return the light and look within yourself, because these three come out of you. So this is very interesting. He's saying you might want to know about these and you might want to see them, but you aren't going to get them simply by wanting and desiring to have this knowledge or vision. The only way you get it is by changing yourself. And in changing yourself so that you're unencumbered and completely clear, these things will become obvious to you. And the Buddha uses another analogy. He says it's evident as holding an apple in the palm of your hand. But before you have that clarity of mind, you'll just imagine, you'll visualize, or you'll go the opposite. And the six patriarchs say, don't go down that road. Don't go down that road. Use this as an inspiration to find those three functions, abilities within your own person. They're very important. There's another expression that does this well. It says, there is a road in heaven. Tiandao. There's a road in heaven, but you can't walk it except by walking the ground under your feet. And what the meaning is like you want to know what the heavenly road is, and the text is saying, yeah, there is one, and there's many heavens and whatnot, but you're not going to figure that out except by walking the ground under your feet, because one leads to the other. You don't transcend, you transform. And by transforming, you enter into what was then before inaccessible and obscure to you. So this is really important because the whole emphasis here is not on mystical attainment or aspirations for the transcendent, but working on the here and now. That's why it says when one attends to the here and now, the false or the obscure returns to true and clear. This is really important. Let's just take a moment here to see, because this is a very quick summary. Then he's saying, if you see it in your own nature, that's the seed for your awakening. If you don't see it within your own nature, you don't discover it, you don't work on it, there's going to be no awakening. Because these three Dharma bodies, or these three Buddhas, are not going to come to you except through cultivating the ground that was given to you to till, which is your own being. So, if we could, go back to page 59. That's why it's good to hand out the books, because now you can go back to page 59. And we'll see, I'm sure all of you remember this passage really clearly. Yeah, past thought cannot be got at. Got it. Okay, page 59, this is where he is giving the refuges in the mind ground teaching, right? He's doing this. And here he goes into, he mentions the three bodies again. If you see in the middle of 59, he does a direct teaching of the three bodies. I take refuge. In other words, I rely and return to the pure Dharmakaya body within my own body. I take refuge of the perfect, complete reward body within my own body. And I take refuge of the hundreds of thousands of myriads transformation bodies, Nirmanakaya, within my own body. So each of these three he brings back to my own body. The three come back to the one, and the one is you. Now, you don't want to get over the top and say, I'm the one, like the Matrix. You're not the one in that sense. You're just like one of many. Soul one of your kind, but you're one of many. All have the same potential. You're not the chosen one, okay, just to be clear. Now, what he's doing here, and then he goes on, he says, look at the bodies. So he goes to the first one. The three bodies exist within our nature. All people in the world have them. But because they are confused, they do not see their inner nature. They are looking externally for these bodies. They don't realize that the three bodies they have are within their own. This is really, really critical. And then he goes through, and let's just look at this briefly because it's really quite, I think, like existentially right on the mark. Right within your own body, your own nature is replete with the three bodies of a Buddha. These three bodies arise from your essential nature. They do not come from outside. Now you're saying, okay, so we got three bodies up here, wooden bodies on the altar that we got that I really like. But these are symbols. These are not the three bodies of the Buddha, okay, manifested in wood. What they are is mirrors, so to speak, to remind us to look within and find the three bodies complete within ourselves. These are mnemonic devices, memory-inducing devices. They're stimulants for what he calls looking back and turning to your own nature. Now, on the next page he goes in and says a little bit about the pure Dharma body. And this is a beautiful passage. Just read it in whole. The essential nature of people is basically pure, and from it the 10,000 things are created. Thoughts of evil give birth to evil deeds. Thoughts of goodness give birth to wholesome deeds. Thus it is that all dharmas come to be from the essential nature. They come out of this essential nature. Both good and evil stem from this essential nature. It is, and this is a metaphor, it's like the sky above, which is always clear, and the sun and moon, which are forever bright. Even if obscured by floating clouds that overshadow the world below in darkness, the sky above remains clear. If a wind suddenly comes up, scattering the clouds, then above and below are both bright, and everything reappears and becomes visible. The tendency of people, however, is to constantly drift like the clouds in the sky. But see, what he's pointing to is saying this Dharmakaya, this Buddha nature, this unchanging, complete, essential potential for perfection is like that clear sky with the sun. It's always that way. And only because we get the clouds, and you can go into some, we could have a little poetic thing here. What are the clouds? And I'm not Joni Mitchell's. I looked at clouds from both sides now. What are the clouds?
Confusion.
Huh?
Confusion.
Clouds could be confusion. Anything else?
Depression.
Huh?
Depression.
Depressions? I mean geological or psychological?
Emotional.
Emotional. Okay. Attachments, clingings.
Thoughts.
Huh?
Thoughts.
Thoughts, views that we went over last week. Those could be the clouds. Denying cause and effect, for example, becomes a cloud. Fear, anxiety, klesha, basically, are the clouds. Greed, anger, jealousy, stinginess. A cloud can be seeking, craving, wanting, even for enlightenment. That can be a cloud. And so he's saying these clouds and people's tendency is to constantly drift like the clouds in the sky. And it's not just meaning we let the clouds in, but we drift like the clouds. We don't strike, the text, the Avatamsaka says, we don't strike deep the root of Bodhi. We don't strike it deep. We don't get it deeply buried. We kind of like put it in the garden, kind of like, oh, nothing's happening. Throw a little water, take a vacation for 3 weeks, come back and say, yeah, see, it wasn't there, nothing's happening, this kind of thing. I'm going on retreat for 7 days, and then I'm going to Bacchanalia Festival for 3 weeks, and after that I feel like wasted and empty, and I'm coming back to retreat, and I drift like the clouds, 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, 2 to the side, 1 to the other side, and I like getting dizzy and da-da-da-da. This is the opposite of the Bodhi resolve. The Bodhi resolve, you're there, and you don't care, you don't matter, you just keep going regardless. Good states, bad states, you plow on. But like clouds, you get blown away. And it's interesting that the clouds and the wind that blows them is both us. It's not like wind comes and blows our clouds. We generate the wind by our movement, and our movement then moves our clouds. It's coming from leaving the essential nature. It's not like outside, okay? So just be clear about that. And then he goes on, he's saying this is basically the Dharma body, and this goes on quite a bit. Then he goes to page 61, he says, well, what's the reward body? Let's look at that, again, from the mind ground of the essential nature. And he says, just like a lamp can disperse 1,000-year darkness, one insight can wipe out 10,000 years of delusion. This is called the manifestation. If you actually cultivate yourself, what happens is a light is generated, and that light clarifies everything. This is the reward. This is the return. Do not think about the past. It's gone. It can never be recovered. And don't keep thinking about what's to come. So this is attending to the here and now. This is just simply attending to the here and now, the ground under your feet, so to speak. And with every moment of thought, perfect and clear, not muddy, not confused, perfect and clear, see your original nature, and so forth. If a single thought of evil arises in the essential nature, it destroys 10,000 aeons of good karma. One good thought generated from the essential nature erases evils as many as the sands of the Ganges River. And here he says, what is the reward body? The Sambhoyakaya? Not losing your fundamental mindfulness. What? It's not getting something. It's not losing your fundamental mindfulness. And what's interesting about this is he is saying, in no uncertain terms, that mindfulness is fundamental to us. It is our nature. It's a part of our nature. It's the deepest part of our nature. You could call it the spiritual nature. You could call it the Buddha nature. But it's not something that comes from outside or something that's greater in others and less in others and so forth. It's inherent nature. And when he says that, what he means is that if you are not mindful, which is your natural disposition, how did you get there? Not like, how do I get mindfulness? The question he's asking here, how did you lose it? How did you lose your mind? Because it's operative, it's functioning. It is clear and distinct. It's just like this unfailing meter, gauge. So how did you lose it, neglect it, muck it up so that it's not working? It's a very different approach. When he says losing your fundamental mindfulness is to lose your reward body in a sense, and never losing your fundamental mind. So he says walking, standing, sitting, lying down, do not lose it. Do not separate from it. So you can see again, it's nien nien, thought after thought, day after day, moment to moment, you're on it. You're balanced. You got your compass really clear. Then that reward body naturally manifests. If you lose it, you recover it. That's why he calls it repent and renew, return, come back. And then, last one, what he does here is the transformation bodies. What are the hundreds of thousands of those? If your thoughts do not get caught up in the myriad things, then your nature is basically like empty space. Do not caught up in, do not follow, do not indulge in, do not get confused by. It doesn't mean you ignore the 10,000 things. You see them as they really are. You respond and you work through them, like smoke moving through water. You ever see smoke moving through water? It's really kind of cool. Smoke can come right through water. It doesn't get stuck. It's very interesting. Yeah. Anyhow. Clouds, some people, the other expression that's used, as the moon moves through the sky. It is, in this sense, your thoughts, the moon doesn't get caught up in the myriad things. It just simply moves through empty space. The clouds come and go. It just keeps moving through empty space. It's not impeded, and yet it's right within the totality of the universe. That kind of image. And then he goes into it. This is very specifically basic. He says, with a single thought, transformation occurs. Whoa. So what he's doing here is saying, with a movement, and by thought he means an impulse, an emotion, a feeling, a habit, an idea, and so forth. With that movement, transformation occurs. Good thoughts, wholesome thoughts, so on and so forth, transformation results in this. Evil thoughts, confused thoughts, moves into that. And he talks about hell beings and divine beings. So this is that expression. Across the spectrum of the 10 Dharma realms, all of these are thought made, are thought born. Hells, animals, ghosts, people, asuras, devas, and the enlightened beings all are manifestations or transformations created by thoughts. Not necessarily just by one thought. It begins with one thought. One thought turns into a pattern turns into a habit, becomes a sort of energy unto itself, and that becomes a paradigm, and that becomes almost like what the Upanishads call, that becomes then your fate or your destiny. But not in the sense that it was externally driven, but beginning with these thoughts. So if you want to understand where you are now, you reverse engineer and look at must have been these thoughts, emotions, feelings that created this and so forth. And that's the point of liberation. When you get into that space where you watch the thoughts, the movements as they arise, and you can get a sense of where they're going, you're on the heart of what he's talking about, thought after thought, here and now, pay attention to this, because that's the only leverage you have. And so then he goes, this goes on for quite a way. But anyhow, that's page 59. If you wanted to then open this up from the just distilled version that's presented here, you go back to that part of the text and look at it carefully. Next passage. The pure nature arises from the transformed body. This natural purity is ever present within the transformed body. This nature leads the transformed body along the right path until it arrives, perfect and complete, truly never ending. Why, my question is, anybody who wants to venture, does he just go into the transformation body now? Why does he not talk about the Dharmakaya, Dharma body, or the reward body? But he goes, this passage just simply goes right into various versions of the transformation body. Why? What do you think?
Is that where the work's done?
Excuse me?
Is that where the work is done?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's as if the reward body is the result of something else. And the Dharmakaya body is something that's rather inconceivable to us as an ideal. And the only thing we have right now is the Rupakaya, our transformation body right now. So it's like he's paying attention to this. He's saying that's where you direct your attention, because if you saw earlier, he's saying finding that right within your own nature is a seed for awakening. And then he explains your own nature is the here and now. That's your transformation body you're dealing with at this point. This is very clear. Then the attention goes back. It's like an earlier passage that I'm fond of quoting. You probably heard it. You maybe not remember it. You might remember it and think I didn't say it. But anyway, there's a connection. And this is from an earlier text called the Guanzi. And that text is very interesting, although it's talking about a knowledge of the way things really are in a material sense as well as maybe a spiritual sense. If we plug in a Buddhist thing here, the first line would be what all people wish to know is that, the three bodies. Okay, let's just plug that in. What they wish to know is that. And the second line is, but how can they know that? Only through this. Get it? What people want to know is that, but their means of knowing that is this. This. We want to know these bodies. We want to know what the Buddha state is. But our only way of knowing that is through this mechanism that we have here. Our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mind, and so forth. And the third line is, how can we then know that? And the fourth line is, only by cultivating, perfecting this. So the emphasis in this text of the Guanzi is very similar to this, which is the only way you got, the only key you got to figure things out is working on this, the here and now, this body, this nature, this being. There's nothing else. Don't look outside of that. And this is the constant emphasis in this text. What's presumed here is you can know that. It's not like it says, how can you know that? And the fourth line says, you can't. It's following postmodern nihilism. It can't be known. It's saying it can be known, but your emphasis has to be on the knower, on the mechanism of knowing. Otherwise, there's no way of knowing. How could you possibly? It's the same way, how do you walk that road in heaven without progressively walking the ground under your feet? The same idea. Okay, So then, he goes on to this next line. This next line is very interesting because, in fact, I hadn't seen it until I'm doing it in progression tonight, as like it came. My teacher pointed out that this is probably one of the keys of the whole text, is this next verse. Lust actually stems from the pure nature. Just turn back lust, natural purity wholly restored. Each of you within your own nature, let go the 5 desires. Immediately see your nature. This is real and true. This is both theory and practice. It's actually saying, how is it that you attend to the seed awakening? How is it you go back to the first line of his teaching? Simply attend to this and you will straightway attain Buddhahood. This is what you attend to. You attend to this, the here and now. And what this line, I think, is saying, as you attend to this, one of the biggest things that arises is the lust, nature, this craving, this wanting, this trishna, this thirst, tana. It is almost as if this is our nature, is to crave, to want, to possess, to acquire. And the text is saying you have to work with this because that arises from the pure nature. It's not apart from it. It's not dualistic. Oh, I'm pure and this is all here. And then the lust comes in. The lust comes about through a movement within the pure nature. This is where the Shurangama Sutra is very important to understand, how it explains how out of this innate purity of the essential nature, a movement occurs. And unchecked, unexamined, that movement becomes a karmic seed that then creates basically a living being as opposed to a Buddha. So this is the non-dualistic teaching. We don't want to essentialize this and say, oh, there's a pure nature apart from my human. No, the human also comes out of this nature, Sutta Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and demons. This is that potential ground, the whole complete ground, if you want to call it the Tathagata Garbha, also the matrix it's called. And from this, everything that manifests, the 10,000 things, come from it. So if we go to that point here, then he's saying, I think here is when you attend to this, probably the most basic movement that occurs that will obstruct this is lust and desire. I'm not hopefully saying anything that's too outlandish for most people. I mean, if you've read Freud, you realize he's making a similar observation about this tendency. And you read works of literature and whatnot, multiple explanations attribute most of the activity in the world is some kind of either direct or sublimated expression of eros, of this fundamental craving. Now, where that stems from is another interesting discussion from the Buddhist point of view, because the Buddhist point of view is that stems from a misreading or misunderstanding of vidya, and not seeing things clearly, that creates an anxiety, and the anxiety creates the craving. It's not the other way around. Of course, craving does result in anxiety, but the root of craving is an anxiety. It's a confusion. It's a misreading. Therefore, it arises as an attempt to quell or to mitigate that anxiety or stress that's created by a fundamental misperception. It's very much like the Jataka tale where, let me see, who is it? The monkey is sitting under the breadfruit tree, right? And he's sitting there peacefully doing his meditation as monkeys do, which is dreaming about food. And something falls out and hits him on the head. And he jumps up and says, oh my God, he looks up and says, the sky's falling, the whole universe is coming apart. And he panics, he gets spooked. And he starts running, and he tells the next animal, and that animal starts running with him. They tell the next animal, you know this story, right? You know the story. The sky is falling, Chicken Little. Yeah, it wasn't Chicken Little. This comes from a Jataka, by the way. I don't know. Chicken Little adapted it. Sorry, the original was a Jataka. And so they're running, and all these animals finally get a stampede, and they finally come to, I think it's the lion, the king of lions, not the Lion King, the king of lions. And the lion, which is basically the Buddha, just says, whoa, 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 stop. And they all stop. And says, what's going on? We gotta get out of here. The sky is falling. How do you know? Well, the giraffe said, the elephant told me. The elephant said, well, the antelope told me. The antelope says, well, the snake told me. The snake told me. And there in the back is the monkey. And everybody says, the monkey told. And the Buddha then says, okay, so I know there's alternative facts and things like this, but facts are important. Let's go back and check this out. So they go back, and he said, where did you see? Oh, it happened right here. And the Buddha looked up and he says, well, I see a blue sky. I don't see any cracks, so what do you make of that? Well, I know it hit me on the head. And the Buddha said, can you bring? And he says, here it is. Here's a piece. And the Buddha said, that's a piece of breadfruit. It's a piece of broken fruit that fell out of the tree and hit you on the head. It's not the sky. Oh, well, that changes everything. Well, I'm using this as a metaphor to say the arising of the anxiety is this misperception that the sky is falling, which then leads to the lust and craving. And the Buddha is saying the reason lust and craving don't work is that they're founded on a misperception to begin with, and it won't penetrate to solve the underlying stress and craving. And that's what the Lotus Sutra says, and this is foolishly trying to use suffering to end suffering. But that's going into a diversion I didn't want to necessarily go into, but I thought it was important. Here, though, it's really important to look at this in the sense that he is representing both a theory here, that lust or craving is not our fundamental nature, but it is a turning of our nature. And it's very powerful, it's very strong. But it can be turned back. And if it's turned back, and I like the language of turning back, in other words, rather than following and indulging it or harnessing it and galloping out, you simply turn. And that turning is called the other shore. The ocean of suffering is vast, but a turning of the head is the other shore. In other words, you change your attitude and you do not follow and indulge it. Now, is this easy? Yeah, it's just like really easy, right? Who's laughing? This is so easy. It's like, duh, of course. No, it's really hard. In fact, the Buddha said in the Sutra 42 sections, if I have time, I'll read you a passage tonight. If there was another thing like this, no one would ever become awakened. Okay, so this is the hard one. You say, well, it's not hard for me. Well, it's generally hard for all people, all living beings. From the moment, actually the Buddha says, even the moment before we're born, it starts with grasping and attaching. And as soon as we emerge from the womb, it's nonstop. Grab, attach, want, push away, grab, attach, push away, until, and then even at the last moment, we're still trying to hold on to something. We try to hold on to the body, it goes. We try to hold on to our feelings, it goes. Our thoughts go. Everything goes. Consciousness is finally like this little wisp, and we try to hang on to that, and then that goes. So, and then we grab again, and it starts. This is the 12 conditional links. I don't want to go into it, but that's what it's talking about. So from the moment we're born till the moment we pass away, there's no moment, really, unless you're cultivating, that you're ever free from this anxiety-driven lusting. It's that powerful. And yet, you can be free of it. This is what's important. So he's not saying, and this is really important here, to repress it. He's not making a statement. He says, turn it. Let go of the 5 desires. It's very interesting, see the language here? You turn it. In other words, you don't follow it, you don't indulge it, you don't repress it. You simply observe it rise and fall. You watch it. And to require the observing of the rise and fall of this conditioned dharma called lust requires a special mantra, which we dispense on our website for $500. But no, it requires patience. It requires patience and a kind of resolve. Just like any other state that arises, anxiety arises, anger arises, fear arises, wanting and so forth. And the meditation technique is to simply don't repress, don't indulge, hold steady and watch the rise and fall, and it will come and go on its own. So too with the lust nature. Although of all the various, I would say, urgings, longings, this one in particular is really intense. It's not as the same as sort of like, I'll try not to get angry. It's almost like overwhelmingly powerful. But what's being presented here is that it is possible to make big lust into something smaller, and to make smaller lust into something even smaller, until eventually there's a kind of equanimity that arises. And that's the result, by the way, of turning it back. It's not that you're uptight and repressed. It's not that you're wound up like a bomb, a clock. It is, in fact, that you have a kind of calm and equanimity about you. When this is done properly, and over time with precepts and various means of equanimity practice, what happens is it indeed transforms by itself into light, fullness, joy, happiness, energy. It's interesting. You don't have to then stop it and then transform it. It transforms by itself because it is your nature now that's not following it. So this is the wonderfulness of this. You don't have to repress it, nor do you have to, quote, remove it or cut it off. It's not advocating that. It's simply saying, channel it, harness it. Don't be led by it. Don't give in. Simply let go. Don't grab on. And naturally, not only will it not take you over, but the wind and light of your original ground will manifest by itself. This is something that you can directly experience not at the end of your life or at the end of your cultivation, but in the here and now. To the degree to which you don't follow and indulge us, surprisingly, and I am the first to say this, surprisingly, a joy and a fullness starts to return that's inconceivable. In the chant that you do at lunch, you say we take dhyana bliss as our food. What this is talking about is the urge for food, which is one of the 5 desires, this lust for food. By cultivation, something else fills you up, so to speak, which is the joy and bliss of meditation. So too with fame. You are content and whole within yourself without seeking people to stroke you, reinforce you, whatnot. You have a wholeness of your honor and integrity. That's the second, food, fame. Wealth, this is better than having money. This is, in fact, your IRA. The joy and the fullness that comes from doing this becomes a replacement for the lust for wealth. And, of course, the fourth one, sex, and this is what he's talking about here. And finally, what is called sleep, but it really means that through this cultivation, your recharge, your regeneration, your restfulness is coming from this. That is why people who really cultivate this, especially, for example, during a meditation session when they're really engaged, eat less. They don't need to eat so much. They eat what they need rather than the greed. And they're not interested in, hitting on or being hit upon. They're just sort of content in just being in their own space. Fame, wealth, it's not an issue. It's just like the middle way. I have just what I need, not too much, not too little. Clothes is part of that. How many clothes can you accumulate? How many beds can you sleep in? How big? It's just about this size, right? Food, fame, wealth. Sex is not the urge because there is a joy and a bliss, and it's real. It's not an imaginary one that comes from not outflowing in this way. And then finally, rest and regeneration. People find themselves sleeping less because a lot of sleep is driven by the outflowing that comes from engaging in the lust thing. Let me read the section here. And this is the section where the Buddha says it's really easy. No. This is called the Sutra in 42 sections or 42 parts. It's one of the earliest texts translated into China at White Horse Monastery, I believe. And it was a mixed translation of both Chinese and Central Asian translators. An Gao was part of the translating team that put this together. So one of the earliest texts that come into China. And maybe sometime in lectures, it's really, really a cool text. And there's 42 sections, which would take me 42 months, but or one class. The Buddha said, and this is his teaching, people encounter 20 kinds of difficulties when they begin to cultivate. What are the 20? I won't read them all, I'll just get to the difficulty to give when one is poor. The difficult to study the way when one has power and wealth. What? Let me repeat. The difficulty of studying the way when one has power and wealth. Why? Because you can buy the way. Why would it be a difficulty? Power and wealth occupy your mindfulness. Your basic mindfulness is now mindful of power and wealth. This is not a contemporary issue. This, you have to remember, this was early China. This doesn't apply today, that people would find it difficult to cultivate because of power and wealth. The difficulty to abandon life and face the certainty of death. In other words, to be able to face the certainty of death and graciously let go and not wail against the darkening night. The difficulty to encounter the Buddhist teachings. Very interesting. I experienced this in my early days. I was empty of kind of what life offered, really hungry in search of something. Went into the mountains by myself to see if I could, meditate and whatever, because I heard that was something you do. And without encountering the text, the teachings, I was just like a ship without a rudder. I was just blown away. The impulse was there, but there was no mentoring. There was no ground or formula to use. And so without having the teachings, it's difficult. The difficult to be born at the time of a Buddha. In other words, it's difficult because to be born at a time, not only when you have the teachings, but you actually have an embodied teacher, that's hard. I mean, a lot of people talk about that in the contemporary time. Where can I find a Kalyana Mitra, a really good advisor? Like, I looked online, I've gone through the yellow pages, they're really hard to find. So this is to be born at a time when you have that as. And then this next one, it's difficult to bear lust and desire. This is right in the middle. So I'm just saying, it's one of the major difficulties that's presented. But it's a difficulty, it's not a career-ending thing, you know what I'm saying? It's not like, difficulty means something that you can overcome as opposed to an absolute blockage. Difficult to see good things and not seek them, and so forth. I'm not going to go through all 20, but that's tonight of how much I want to do. So I think that would take us pretty much to this passage of text, and then next week we'll continue. Anybody have any questions or comments about this section? It's rich, it's dense. Earlier parts of the text unpack a little more, but I'm just saying, given that he's presenting it here at the end as his final instruction, and given that the teachers that I have that worked with me with this text really stressed this final section as being the key, both to the theory and to the embodiment, the actual working of this. And then this particular passage here, simply turning that back, letting go of the 5 desires. It's, by the way, sometimes the 5 desires are represented as, I just mentioned, food, fame, wealth, sex, and sleep, but also sights, sounds, smells, taste, and tactile tangibles. So that we go out and we attach and grasp after these, hoping to relieve that anxiety. So, let me read you then one section left. And this goes back to the point I think the text was making earlier, and I've been trying to emphasize, which is there's only one way and one place to go in working with this is right with the here and now as you find yourself in your current condition. Whatever the blessings and the obstacles are, that's the only ground you have. There's no other ground to cultivate it from. But if you wish, he says, to have that full awakening, then you have to attend to this, to the here and now. And this is also from the Sutra. And what I was saying earlier about when he says, do not look outside for these things, but don't even look inside in a sense. Simply cultivate yourself and they will manifest naturally. One of the early disciples was wanting to have a certain spiritual ability or power called Chinese they use shentong, which means spiritual penetrations, psychic powers. This became one of the quests or sought after states that people then, now, and I would guess in the indefinite future, that people want. And this one had particular to do with, anybody know what some of those abilities or powers are? You don't have to say, yeah, I got this one. Just say,
See
what,
your past life.
huh?
See your past life.
Knowing past lives. That kind of knowledge of the past. And some people say it also includes abilities to be able to see into the future or to see where conditions are going to lead. Anything else?
To fly.
The fly? Oh, the ability to move across realms, yes, or fly. Sometimes the heavenly ear, the heavenly eye are used as basically these are explaining the penetration to understand what's going on in these different realms and so forth. Okay, this one involves, the disciple wants to know, he asks, what are the causes and conditions by which one comes to know past lives? That's the one he wants. Why would you want to know that? That's interesting. Why would you want to know your past lives? I'm going to have a hard time remembering last year, even last week. And there's a lot about my past that I'd soon forget. I'd like to know it.
We all think we were princesses.
Huh?
We all think we were princesses.
Yeah, princesses and princes in the past, right? What's the desire to know past lives? It's very interesting. Yes?
Karma. Know your karma.
It could be academic in the sense of, yes, knowing your karma, therefore knowing the causes and conditions by which you ended up how you were, and therefore one of the 10 powers of the Buddha is to know where all paths lead. So by knowing where the various paths led, you can then change your course and not repeat. That could be one. A lot of people are just fascinated because they want to, as you say, find their glorious royal past, right? I mean, that's a lot better than renting movies. If you could know your past life, you just sit there at night and go, whoa, I'm going to back here in the Tang Dynasty. Here I was. Yeah, ooh, I don't want that one. So he says, what are the causes and conditions that one comes to know past lives and by which one understands, enables one to attain the way? So his motivation in understanding this is to know, how did I step and misstep? How can I know that? And the Buddha said, it's very interesting, by purifying the mind and guarding the will, your understanding can attain the way. Just as when you polish a mirror, the dust vanishes and the brightness remains, so too if you cut off desire and do not seek, you can know past lives. So again, what the texts come back to is not mystical, it's not magical, it is simply clearing up the lens. Getting rid of seeking and desire, naturally you will see into that train or that continuity. And it's obscured now because of the grasping and attaching here now. So it's very interesting. He doesn't say do a special fast, take a mushroom, get a special transmission. He simply says clear up your mind and you will naturally see how things were and possibly how things could be. Yes?
I have a bit of confusion or a question about desire. And it seems to me that Guanyin Bodhisattva has a desire that all people find liberation. And in some of our recitations, we talk about, I vow to liberate all living beings. That in itself is a desire, is it not? And so is that returning to the pure nature, or is it form of lust, or where does it, how does that shake out in relation? It's a desire, but it seems like a positive desire.
How does it all shake out? It's only a problem in English. So only Westerners have. It's a problem in English because these are translated from very precise terms, and using desire as a translation of these terms, on one hand, clarifies it, because we can say desire is like hubris, it's like a hamartia in the Greek text, it's a flaw, because it's a kind of craving and a lust. Or desire can be a positive resolve and a wish and whatnot. The English word desire covers that whole realm. But if you look at the language, usually like a vow is different than the word that's used for desire. Here, desire is sometimes used as graha, which means to grab. And it's a grabbing, possessive. It isn't, I want to grab enlightenment. It's like, well, no, there's something wrong there. You want to attain enlightenment. You resolve to realize enlightenment. We use English words like that, but you don't grab it. Trishna, is the word that's used traditionally, or tana in Pali, to describe that word here that the texts are referring to as the obstruction to awakening. Now, when we translate it as lust, that's pretty clear. We don't say Guanyin lusts for living beings to be. No. But desire has a softer meaning. So when we translate these words into desire, we confuse, and your confusion is understandable given the language issue. But if we translate it as craving, as lust, as thirst, as that obstructs, different than resolve or aspiration, then we're doing a better work at the translation. But if we drop desire on the top, which has all this, and the same thing with the word love, and we drop that on top and say, well, the bodhisattva of love is Guanyin, as opposed to compassion, which is a kind of love without passion or something different. And that's why the language in translation is really important to use. But thirst, and I went through this, basically has three kinds, but it's a craving, insatiable craving that's driven by misunderstanding and anxiety that in and itself can never be satisfied because it's off in its purpose and motivation to begin with. And so it's represented as sort of, in the Greek thing, you'd have Tantalus, the being who's punished to always be looking at something, the grapes that he wishes, but never being able to get them. So again, I think getting clear with the language is really important. I don't know if that helps. But that's part of what we struggle with when we translate. Sometimes it's compound. When you say lust and desire, it then moves it along that spectrum to that end. If you say desire and longing, it's in there. But if you say desire and altruism, you're moving it to another realm. So sometimes we have to use compounds, sometimes, but generally finding the right language isn't just a question of going through the dictionary. It has to do with, and one of the things I'm emphasizing, these are therapeutic teachings. They're meant to untie our bonds and to liberate them. If in our translation we create knots that cause us to have deep doubts and about, well, why would I care about anybody? Because caring about everybody is a desire. If that creates that, then we haven't translated correctly. It would be my first take. Because there's an actual unwholesome effect that's coming from rendering the text in that way. And if we understand these texts are meant to be liberating devices, then something's wrong in how we're doing that if that's the result. So you not only have to translate linguistically as best you can, but you also have to translate psychologically and spiritually dynamically to find the equivalent that produces the effect of insight, understanding, liberation, and the ending of dukkha. And if we don't do that, we misinterpret, and in a sense we end up slandering actually the text. So we have to be very careful about, it's a long answer to a good question, but anything else? Yes?
I do have a question.
The mic isn't for me, but that's okay. Go for it.
Audience online.
Yeah.
past lives and that question of why would you want to, if there's kind of something in the teachings about a purpose for going through a process of recollecting. And the reason why I ask is I've had a sort of, especially as I've kind of deepened my practice, I've had a lot of recollection of past life stuff. And I've been trying to figure out how I need to be relating to it. And it sounds like what I hear is I hear two different things. I hear the kind of, you don't need to worry about it, just let it go, it's in the past, as well as other teachings which seem to indicate it might have some benefit. So.
All of these skills and abilities, if you want to call them that, or these openings, or whatever they are neutral. It's how you interpret them that make them either effective Dharma tools or impediments. For example, if you see something from a past life, let's say, you say, oh my God, I was really cute. Whoa, I was so cute and attractive, and I was king of the hill. Wow. And you sort of then start walking on cloud nine and you neglect the here and now. It's like, well, I still got a lot of that mojo in me. And or you go and you say, oh my God, I was with this gang of terrible, rapacious thieves and bandits, and I was the leader of that gang. And wow, and then you get anxiety driven. Am I going to do that again? Is that my tendency? Oh, la, la, la. And the text, this is where the Shurangama Sutra is really important, because in the end of that text, it goes into the various states of seeing and experiencing that can arise as you cultivate, including all these psychic kinds of things. And the text is very clear. As these arise, they are signs that your cultivation is moving along and progressing. Things are opening up and becoming clear. If you don't see them as special, and either have a fondness or fear for them and just say, oh, okay, and you continue to move on, then nothing, and you will continue to make progress. But as soon as you think there's something, either out of fear or fondness, then you get turned and you lose the here and now, and you start attaching not to like a car or a person, but to these states of mind, which are just as impedimenting as other things. So again, it's how you use and interpret them. This text saying the person seems to want to know so they can correct their steps and not repeat their errors. And even though that's a noble motivation, the Buddha is not even encouraging that. He's simply saying, clear your mind of even wanting to know past lives. Because wanting to know them, even if you think your motivation's right on, you're still seeking something. And that seeking will actually turn what you see and understand into something that it's not, or invite it. And this is one of the dangers that happen. Like, I think I saw that past life, da-da-da. And you start to, like a dream, you manifest. So the thing I would say is his chapter on repent and renew is really good in this way. It says, when you are cultivating, you start to hold the precepts, and you start to purify your karma, and start to refrain from harming and bad habits. What happens is you start to see those things more clearly, those tendencies. And you can even see how you did them last week, or last year, or when you were 5 or 6 or whatnot. And these things start to come up naturally, both the good things you've done, but also the bad, because it's part of the clearing of the ground. And the text says, for those things that you do not wish to repeat, that you do not wish to hold you, that you're regretting, simply say, I am sorry, and renew and move on. Don't wallow and don't dwell on them. And for those things that are good that you see, try to reinforce those and try to keep them going. And for the things that are so good that you haven't begun, even take them up and resolve to do them. And the evil that you never imagined, don't entertain. And so what's happening, you always attend to the here and now, so no matter what comes up, you just say, is this the way? Is this advancing? I will then understand and go with it. If it's not, even in that I attach to it in a certain way it's not, I pull back and let it go. And then you're never in trouble. Whether it's remembering yesterday or past life or past lives, doesn't matter. It's the same psychological mechanism. And once you get that under your belt, you're good to go. That's why I would encourage people who are really serious in their cultivation to deeply study the Shurangama Sutra. Because in that formula in the last section, it really gives you all, I would say, the balancing discernment you need to work through. And it's called 50 States. And it's called the 50 States because there's 10 for each of the skandhas you go through. When you go through the physical states, there's 10 associated with that, 10 associated with feelings, and so on and so forth. And they're pretty far out. I mean, you think, oh, I had a relation. No, it's like, you're going, wow, that's really awesome. And then you get the Buddha saying, you think that's awesome? Sorry. Fart, don't go there. Don't go there, no matter what. So what we're dealing with now, what we might encounter, is completely not repressed, nor is it denied. It's just put into a balanced perspective. So I hope that's useful, because,
Yes.
yeah. And the most important thing, this is hard, and this desire comes to that, do not seek for anything. Don't go fishing. Even if you don't bait your hook, don't put it in the water. There's places I've been when I was a child fishing that the fish were so hungry you never even had to bait the hook. Sometimes you didn't even have to put it in the water. You just held the hook an inch above the water and the fish would jump and grab it. It's the same thing with our mind. So any seeking will get a hook. Any seeking will get a hook. So at the place of seeking nothing, it says there's no worries. Nothing to worry about. Everything is okay. But that's as easy as lust. Okay, good question. Announcements? Not only do I not cover a lot of text, I go overtime. This is really a bad habit. I vow to change. Next life.
You got time.
Yes, so tomorrow, as always, we have 7:30 p.m. Avadansaka lecture by Refuge from Australia, online lecture. You can watch in YouTube, similarly like this lecture. You can find the link in Dharma Realm. What is the
Dharma Realm Life.
Dharma Realm Live? Right. And other classes going as well. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Everyday meditation, morning, afternoon. All information you can find on the website, berkeleymonastery.org.
So occasionally, Angsher and I communicate. He's taught me how to use FaceTime. That allows us to talk free and to see each other. But it also opens a portal to Australia. And so our last conversation was, wow, you got to see these bats. They're called flying foxes. I'm going, I don't really like bats or snakes. No, you got to see these. He says, look at this. And these bats have a 3-foot wingspan. So is that cool? And it's flying past his head. He said, you got it. I said, don't show me that. He said, yeah, I just came back from lunch and there was a dead one on the road. Huge, 3-foot. And he said, here's the picture. And I'm like, so I don't know what you watch on Saturday night here, but be prepared. Bats. I mean, this is out of Count Dracula, sort of 3-foot wingspan.
I still have a remembrance of a photo he showed of these spiders crawling up the wall, and they were millions of them. They were like wallpaper in his house there. And I literally think about those.
And dream about it too.
Think about those.
And he gives them names. They all have names. Oh, there's Charlie, there's Sue, Okay. We'll do transference.
That's why I was watching that.
Our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see, our hands and hearts can find in giving unity. May our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain.